Now it's on.
All right, great.
Right?
We're good.
I call to order a joint board meeting with the Oak Park River Forest High School School District and ask for a roll call. Oh, anyway, at 6:15 p.m. on Wednesday, June the 1st, 2022. Is it June? Is it Wednesday? You got it. Okay. Pretty good.
For District 200, Mr. Fred Arkin,
Present.
Ms. Gina Harris,
Present.
Mr. Tom Kowski,
Here.
and Ms. Sarah Dixon.
Here.
Okay, I'd like to call the June 1st, 2022 meeting of the Park District Board of Commissioners to order. Get the roll call.
Commissioner Lentz. Here. Commissioner Wick.
Here.
Commissioner Woodland.
Here.
Commissioner Worley Good.
Here.
President Brown.
All right, let's roll. Lisa, do we have any public comments that you want to?
There are no public comments, written comments, or in-person comments. That's my son.
Okay, great. So we are good to dive in to the single agenda item, which is a conversation between our two entities about the field collaboration that we've talked about both at Park District board meetings and here in D200. By way of introduction, I just want to say a few things first before I just generally open this up for conversation with folks present. First, Nicole and Marie, thank you both for being here. You two have played a huge role in getting through some of the behind the scenes details that are going to make this collaboration possible. So thank you for your efforts, both past and future. Secondly, the conversations that we've had about sharing fields have been going on since we looked at it recently, Jan. I think it was January when you and I first connected and began to hatch the idea of finding a way to resolve the challenges we have, while also figuring out ways that we can work together to meet both of our needs. And I appreciate how collaborative and how kind of just generative our conversations have been from the beginning until present. There have been a lot of logistical obstacles that we've identified and overcome along the way. Most importantly, trying to just figure out how potential schedules could work, something that I know you have worked on and that is largely intact and behind the scenes. As we move forward, we've identified really a significant final hurdle that we need to clear as we make this step, and that is specific to the light ordinance that is on our current south field, our Lake Street field. Currently, it is 4 o'clock, which we've utilized at the high school for several events, throughout the past several years. But with the collaboration, Park District and our softball program largely utilizing Regional Common Field for their events, practices, and games and all that. There's a displacement that occurs, and in order to satisfy that displacement from current Park District programming, the need to extend the hours of availability for our south fields became very clear to us as we process. So that is one topic that is yet to be resolved, and we will talk more about that, I'm sure, tonight. We've already brought that to the attention of the village, both manager and board members there, and we expect to bring that for a formal conversation with the village later this summer. Is where I'll leave that. So that's just a current state of where we are. Jan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, and then I'm sure open it up. So.
No, I think the only thing I would add is, I guess echo, is that again, I think that the intent of the conversations and the memorandum of understanding that got put together was for us to determine whether or not we could make it a viable solution to support not only both entities, but also support the community, because again, we have a lot of communities that utilize our fields. In conversations with Nicole and Maureen, I think that to your point, what we have found is that there is enough assets to go around as long as we have enough hours in the day. And that's where the lights come to play. And so again, it's not playing on just the south field, but it's utilizing the new turf field that will be inside the track as well. And so while we won't say these are the 7 hours will be here and the 12 hours will be here, what we'd like to reassure both boards is that we have enough capacity to make it happen if in fact the hours can be extended on the south field until 10 p.m.
You know, let me add one bit of clarity. Thank you for that. You prompted me to one of the things. At one point in our earlier conversations, I think when I was first visiting the Park District Board, back a few months back, we talked about a potential timeline of having an IGA finalized, you know, sometime in early June. But because of the scheduling need, that IGA can't be finalized until we know exactly what this like, how to really develop that situation. Once that is, we anticipate bringing to both that IGA is that way that you talked about a second ago. So, yeah, that's pretty much where we are. So I don't know exactly how we want to open it up for board members, except to just say it's open up and folks can chime in and ask questions or whatever you want.
So just a real quick question with, so the village comes back and says, okay, we're good with the 10 o'clock and all that. From that point forward, what is the timeline for completion and everything up and running for both you and for the Park District regarding the fields?
So does that question include, it does, I think, construction, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah, so, so assuming the light situation gets resolved sometime this summer, our plan would be to finalize an IGA as quickly thereafter, okay? And the construction timeline is still where we have had it all along. That would be changed by where we are now. That means that it would be sometime in, it would be roughly a 4 to 5 month window that would have the summer months in the dead center of it, and then go on either side of that for completion. So we're talking about probably beginning construction sometime as early as maybe mid to late April. All right, but you got to give a little bit on either side of that because it's not been set, and then perhaps a little bit into the fall semester as well. Yeah.
all right, so, and then onto
And
that.
that's in 2023.
Yes, correct, right. That's when the agreement with Concordia runs out in June of whatever of 23.
You got it. That's
Okay.
exactly right.
So can we then start our field work, you know, without having to worry about you guys finishing? I mean, because you could do it in conjunction with each other, or we can just start, you know, whenever the right time is to replace our field, because that's what's going to happen at some point. I'm just wondering if that can be, do they have to go together at the same time, or can one be done while we're waiting on the other?
Well, I guess what I would say is that from a logistics standpoint, what we want to do is to figure out how we have the least impact. And by having the least impact is you don't want everything down at the same time.
Yeah.
And so to your point, we will create a staggered schedule. And whether it is leaving Ridgeland Common up until the until the track area gets taken care of, and then come in and address it at the end of the year, we can do that. Again, we were laying turf at Brooks and Julian in November. So again, depending on what the weather can do, we haven't made that plan yet, but you're absolutely correct. We don't want to take everything out at the same time. And to do that transfer of turf, we're really talking about like a 2-week project. It's not an extended.
Yeah, I think what's key is that last part. There's so much more flexibility with how to handle Ridgeland Common, returning that, and really actually the south fields, you know, the Lakeshore field, because you're really just returning something that's already there with some other minor changes, especially on the south. The track is a different story, you know, much more fun.
Will there be some financial advantages to trying to do the laying of the turf in both places at the same time or close to the same time?
I think the best answer I can give is I'm not sure. We have, we're still in the conversations for kind of nailing down exactly what that cost is going to be, and it's dependent in some ways on time, as you're suggesting. But as Jan pointed out when she was with this, we want to make sure we handle it all in the most efficient way possible. And there's a lot of unpredictable qualities to construction costs right now, particularly when you project out past a few months, and we're talking about a year from now. There's it's a volatile situation. So we won't know until we get down, we actually calculate this stuff out.
Yeah, that's a couple of questions. First of all, I just want to make sure that in our transfer of the programming from the current fields to the south field and to Bridgeton, that we'll be gaining in what I would call amenities, things, dugout space, concern about spectators, those kind of things from where we stand now, that we're not going to be taking a step back to provide our teams programming, at least what they have now. And maybe that's, you guys have.
You want to speak to that, Nicole?
Sure.
The turf in and of itself is going to enhance our facilities.
Is what?
The turf in and of itself will enhance our facilities. So right now, going into the season, we started a conference schedule having played 2 games for softball and having played 3 games for baseball. So with that said, just having the ability to play games when neighboring schools don't have that luxury, that will be in and of itself very beneficial for us. As far as the rest of the amenities, they will be comparable, if not better, than what we have currently. We've spoken to both coaches for the 2 programs that would be impacted, baseball and softball, as you're speaking. And they have agreed to kind of what we have laid out here in our initial goal.
Follow to that?
Sure.
So then the amenities will be comparable for softball and baseball as we move, like for the players and the families and as we make this with this transition.
Right, the only question I think we have right now is with the structure of the dugouts and what that would entail. Otherwise, it would be similar amenities to what they have in their current positions right now, but upgraded as far as newer batting cages and, pitchers areas and things like that.
And family viewing spaces.
Would be, in my opinion, it would be way more beneficial to what we have currently as far as spectator space.
And when, Greg, you mentioned something about the timeline, when you'll have the timeline to answer Sandy's question, I'm curious when you will have this information in relationship to all of that timeline.
For scheduling, you're saying? Yeah, our scheduling is going to be completely dependent on what the timeline for turf looks like. So we may have to front load our schedule to a home front loaded schedule and be on the road towards the end of our seasons. We may have to find satellite locations. We may have to make some partnerships with some of our local competitors to try and figure out what we're going to do with that. But we really can't move that piece until we know what the schedule for turf looks like.
To give you kind of a timeline with more specifics, the actual details of the timeline can be available. So if we have the village and then the light ordinance change this summer, we know that we want to go out to bid sometime in October, if they're all possible. And so that gives us the space between, the light ordinance is shifted, we're get that done in October to bring to this, to bring to our board. I'm sure it'll be the same as our district. First the IGA and then for our board, the costs associated and the time.
When will we know about the people
We're talking with Kevin Jackson, the village manager. We don't have an exact date for when that's gonna be, but I think maybe you know more than I do. As of this morning, it was late June, maybe July.
Yeah, and again, they understand that it is of the essence to start having those conversations, but again, Greg and I are not elected officials, and so
That's
we
right.
believe it would behoove you all to start having those conversations with your peers, so that you understand kind of where they are. I've had the opportunity to just be in informal situations where it's been brought up. So far, the reaction has been positive in regards to, again, I think that what we know from our community is that they want us to collaborate, and the opportunity we're just happening here today, but it's going to require one more entity to collaborate with us to make that happen. And so, but that's where I think that, board members speaking to board members, and then getting it on their agenda for approval is definitely the next step that needs to take place.
Was it not possible for them to come to this?
we didn't invite them to this meeting, and not because we don't like them. It's just more because from a timing perspective, this really kind of came up, kind of like, okay, this is where our challenge point is. But again, their requirement is they will need to change the ordinance that was adopted 20 years ago.
And at the time we set this meeting up initially too, we had completed the scheduling step between Maureen and Nicole. So we didn't know that this light ordinance was there, so.
Thank you.
But
Sorry. Paul.
I'll go back to the question I had. Having, and since we're on lights, appropriate. I have a question regarding the lights. I know we're talking about extending from 8 to 10. Will there be, are we talking about leaving the current lighting in place, or will we be changing the lighting systems to some and upgrading to something that's a little more up to date?
We would be upgrading. So what we'd be looking to do is more LED efficient lights, and the technology has really advanced from 20 plus years ago when those lights were put in. So it'll be more targeted lights. So
There's not as much spillage, right?
correct. Yes.
And I'll also add that we're talking about shorter light bulbs as well as a result of that efficiency. So, I mean, it's not just better, more targeted LED lights, it's shorter poles that even if you have the same lights on, you have less spillage. So, but yeah, again, the final dimensions of all that is still being totally set, but we're confident it's going to be short.
Do you have something that, my guess is, the conversations with village trustees will revolve around that information? That's right. Do you have an idea of when we will have something that we can share in those conversations? I'm sure they're going to starting getting emails probably tonight. And, we're going to, need to reach out to them and have those conversations.
We're in the absolute final stages of that. So, I mean, days, week, it's very close. Yeah.
I would hope that in village discussions, the impact of the lights on birds, et cetera, and other creatures will be taken into account and will be mentioned. Because I think that's something that environmental folks like me are really interested in, and it's a factor that I think needs to both be paid attention to, and then also when it is paid attention to we tell the community that we have done this.
So I've had some tentative conversations with some board members, and they've been very enthusiastic. Village board members have been very enthusiastic about helping us with this partnership. So, I think all the encouragement that we can give is great, and all the information we can give is important. But I feel fairly confident that they will be hugely supportive of these efforts, knowing that it's going to help the entire community, not just the school, not just the park district. I think it's really a space for everyone. I wanted to go back for 1 second, Nicole, to your comment around the dugouts. I think it's very important that we have parity between the sports, right? Not to say that we should give short shrift to one sport simply because we can't accommodate both, but I think to the greatest extent possible, we do need to have that parity, whatever that looks like. I would hate if, for example, baseball, because we have more control over that space, ends up with something that looks very different from what we have for the girls. I think that sends the wrong message to the community and certainly to our students. So I would love to hear more about that. I don't know if you have anything more that you can say at this time, right? Because we're early days, but that's something that I'm going to be very interested in hearing more about.
Yeah, through the process that we're going through now, we have basically thrown out different options. So we haven't landed on what that's going to look like right now, but we do have options for open versus closed dugouts, brick versus not, heated versus not. We're exploring different options for both things at this point. So we don't have anything finalized, but we've had many conversations about various options.
Can I follow up to that? So the dugouts, specifically, you said that there were options. Are the options the same, to Sarah's question, for the between the sports? Or are these options needing to be different based on space? Is there, like, I'm wanting to have a real clear understanding of what, if there are going to need to be differences, what those differences might look like. And if there are not going to be differences, I think it's going to be really important that we express it to the community as well.
So I'll let Nicole speak more, but I do want to, so the key difference here is that you're doing ground up construction on the south field for the baseball, the varsity baseball field. But the dugouts on Ridgeland Common are in place, they're intact. And they will be there as they currently are. As we move forward. So the question is, balancing those two. And that you may have understood, I just want to make sure if anybody's listening, they understand that difference between the two. Both aren't being built from the ground up with different decision-making rules for one versus the other. There is something existing that is not going to be torn down and reconstructed. And there is something that by definition has to be constructed. So the question is, how parallel can we make these as a result? That's our challenge. So Nicole, you don't want to speak more to that, you don't have to, but I wanted to make that clear.
Right, I think you kind of hit the nail on that.
And I think that because we're not building, for the exact reason that you're saying,
Yep.
we really need to make sure that we are being equitable about how that's being done.
And those two structures are not something that is going to, it's not to say that we couldn't go back and relook at them at a later time. It's not going to impact the overall decisions for the church and the space necessarily. So it is something that we can go back. It's not going to be something that we have to decide on now and make sure that we have a plan in place right now. We could put something up that looks like what we have at Richland and then revisit it for both spaces at a later date. It's not something that we need to necessarily decide.
Ask another question about that. My daughter studied the arts, not sports, when they were here, and I said drill team, so this is all new. So these fields will only be utilized by those teams, or will they be utilized by other teams? And can you talk a little bit more about what are some of the other, as well as the other community aspects that they'll be used for? Because I think I've read pieces of it, but I just would like to hear more, a broader view of what is going to be taking place in these fields.
Sure, so it'll be, and once you see kind of what we've done with scheduling, it's going to be on a rotational basis based on season. So in the fall, nothing will change on that Lake Street field. We'll have lines for field hockey, we'll have lines for soccer. Common will have the same lines that they have currently, so soccer and softball. So what we're able to do is provide a space. So the only thing that would be different, it would be a completely turf space. The only thing that would be different in transitions is color, which would not have any bearing on a soccer game or a field hockey game. In the spring, you can also open it up to lacrosse. It would be baseball, obviously. There's different things that we could do with the mounds to make it removable for lower level baseball, for softball, if we needed to move them over. There's a variety of things that we're going to be able to explore and do with the turf space as it is. So it is not going to be designated for a softball or a baseball facility that we're just staring at empty in the fall. We are able to utilize it for all seasons.
And on the purchase.
So on the park district, currently we utilize it for lacrosse, we utilize it for frisbee, we utilize it for soccer, we utilize it for baseball, we utilize it for softball, youth and adults, and those will continue. If you've gone out there and looked, you'll see that there's 3 different base packs. So it's for 3 different leagues. So it allows us to play the little kids, it allows us to play adult softball, it allows us to play the older kid baseball. So again, those will still be in place. Which allows us to maximize. To Nicole's point, there's also portable mounds that come in because those are used for baseball, but not used for softball or for adult softball program. So again, that will stay the same. What we've discussed in regards to the ability to make this work is that some of our fields that are diamond sport or sports that are with our affiliate groups, they may shift to a later period of time on our field, or they may shift over to the, you call it south field, to the south field, depending on the time of the day. Similar with, we have some multi-field programs, so soccer or lacrosse. Those may shift instead of in the spring being at Ridgeland or on the south field. They may go to the turf field that's within the track or the football field, right? So there's some flexibility from that standpoint. But again, none of our fields are single use. We just can't function.
And to build on that too, I'm the liaison to OPYPS and AYSO and also build relationships with Edge and Alliance and some of the other groups. So soon after the MOA was signed, I actually sat down with those groups and asked for their input to give us where their touch points were, where they had concerns. Maureen did the same, inviting all of our partner groups. And we had Ultimate Frisbee and a couple of other groups. Nicole was there as well, presented very thoroughly. And there were a couple of minor concerns, but I think the general tone was very supportive, and the minor concerns were things that were just understanding the detail of how the scheduling was worked. And I think it came to the point where maybe baseball, softball was one of the touch points that needed reconciliation, and that's where the lighting issue comes from. So no, it hasn't just happened at the park board or staff level. We've been reaching out to the community to get their input. And again, I'd say overwhelmingly, it's very supportive, and the small areas of concern, I think, are being addressed at staff and been in more detailed communication.
I kind of want to expand also on what Gina was asking, but would it would be concerned to our Westfield. And you know, the current utilization of it throughout the year. Because I know, just being a community member and walking by it frequently, that it does not seem to be utilized very often. And so what is it gonna look like from both the school's utilization athletically and PE? And then also, you know, the community utilization.
Sure, so the current space that it's replacing has some major drainage issues that without the turf, we would need to be addressing. So oftentimes you'll see it empty and it may look as though it's a beautiful day outside, but what you have to do is look at the 48 hours prior and see, and if you walked on it, you would know that it's just a swamp at times. So it's deceiving because it looks like it's beautiful out and it looks like it's fine, and then you walk on it and there's divots. So what this would do is actually allow us to play. Again, anybody that's used a turf field knows that it's, you know, you can have a downpour and 15 minutes after that be playable on that surface. So it will open up use. As far as community use, it would open up use for that space and the track, which I think would be something that's very important to note. We have the feeder schools that have been reaching out, looking for a spot to host their track meets. Looking for a spot to host what is their comparable regional. And you know, I reached out to other ADs at other schools that I know have the track that are in our regional to try and find them a space. But it would be very nice to be able to say you have a home here and you have that reoccurring meets and you can have your home meets. What that will do is not only open up use, but you'll get future Huskies on our site earlier, which is everybody's goal. So
And what about the PE curricular we use currently versus what it would do?
right, so again, the PE use of that space is very contingent on weather. So PE uses common from
8 AM to 5, well, 8 to 3.
8 to 3. So first bell to last bell. That would open up a second space outside, which would be huge, especially as we're looking at challenges with some of our indoor spaces. Being able to go outside, weather depending, would be huge for that space. But I imagine it would be used just as much as comments as by our PE staff.
Again, the second part of my question is the community. What kind of use would the park district get, you know, from the renovation of that west field?
Right, well, I think that part of it has been in regards to how we would allocate the field hours off of Bridgeland that we were currently using in order to allow the girls softball to stay there later. So that we would have to redirect those to either, like I said, a diamond field later at night or the multi-purpose field. And that would be whether it's our lacrosse group or ultimate frisbee group or soccer group, that's who would utilize those fields. We currently use the Southfield, I call it Lake Street Field, on Sundays for adult soccer. We continue to utilize those. So we're not looking to reduce any, or we're looking at kind of maneuvering them. And then I think there's an opportunity for, you know, again, as Nicole spoke about the track program for the middle school, there's an opportunity for us to, you know, do some running little relays and have some opportunities to expand some of those offerings as well. So, Yeah, it's mostly looking at some of the affiliate groups, so whether that's soccer, lacrosse, moving them into that turf field area. It's not necessarily the park district's programming, it's more of our partner Maureen.
You know, I will say all of our youth sports, because we have limited access to our own fields, because all the affiliate groups that use it, we have a wait list for every single one of our youth sports programs. So if we did have access, you know, not off hours, we do a lot of our stuff around the other groups. You know, if there was space available when the school didn't need it and the affiliates didn't need it, we could expand some of our, definitely our youth sports programming, and possibly our adult programming as well.
I have a number of kind of, I call it business type questions, so, first of all, I'm excited about collaboration, so this is what it's about. Do you have any other arrangements that would be kind of like this? And what I say like this is where one entity is kind of funding what will be assets on another entity's property. Do we have any other?
Yeah, so the park district has done it a number of times with D97 properties. So the park district paid for half of the Irving sports field when it was constructed in 2013. We maintain it, as well as we have an agreement from a replacement standpoint. So the park district is putting funds on a different field. When the middle school fields were redone, if anybody remembers what those used to look like, those were not nice fields. The park district put about $1.3 million into those two fields, including lights at Julian. The school district put in $300,000, and then our affiliate groups put in approximately $150,000, and then a not-for-profit put in about $100,000. And so that was utilizing, again, park district resources to maximize another entity's property to enhance the overall benefit for the community.
Which is awesome. But in that situation, who owns the asset?
D97 owns the asset
Okay.
because it's their field and property.
So in that context, the same thing, then the original field would be owned then by the park district. It's just so we have parallelism of how it works. Okay. Two other related, because you mentioned a not-for-profit. So what about, I guess, any third-party funding, whether it's through foundation or other support? Park district does that, correct?
We have partnered with a number of entities to fundraise for the projects. That's the
Yes.
question.
Yes. Okay, but I'm just thinking how that would work. If it would have to be whoever owns the asset, or I guess you got to kind of sort it out that way.
Well, I mean, when we did the middle school field, it was an MOU that was created between D97 and PDOP that said that those fields needed to be enhanced. The park district at the time was looking to add one additional synthetic turf field to its portfolio in order to maximize the needs of our affiliate groups. D97 board came back and said you couldn't just do one, you had to do both of them. We didn't have enough money to do both of them. So then that meant we had to kind of go and look for some partners. And so at that time, Peter Trazik, along with Dr. Roberts and myself and my board president at the time, which was Paul Ashman, we met with a number of the affiliate groups, expressed the need and importance of it as a community asset. And they brought funding to the table to assist with that. And then, like I said, the park district put in the majority of it, which was 1.3 million. And that was part of our capital improvement plan, which we had planned for that additional synthetic service.
And kind of following that, the other thing is we as an entity are Oak Park and River Forest. So how does that fit in? Because it is in terms of use of asset, et cetera.
So I guess what I would say as far as that, the only parallel that I have for that is the use of your pools. And so whenever a River Forest resident signs up for a swim lesson program that takes place at D200, they pay the resident rates. If they're signing up for a swim lesson at Ridgeland Common, they pay the non-resident. Because again, it's not a resource that is from their property taxes. So that's the only parallel that I know right now that would simulate. That
Yeah, we just
question.
would need to make sure that River Forest residents who are paying to this district get the benefits of their resources.
And I just want to clarify to make sure there's no misunderstanding on that applies to park district programming here on this campus. Yes. Of course, that would apply to, I'm sure this is clear, but of course, that would not apply to River Forest residents who are students at OPRF who would be using Ridgeland Common for private purposes, that have to do with their high school.
Thank you.
Anything else? Chris? Well, couple things. One, I think, just to what you're saying a little bit, this is as much an agreement for us to use your fields as it is for you to use our fields. And so both of those assets are being shared. You're the one looking to use our field, so I think some compensation for that would be a natural part. Is that what you're sort of trying to dig into, or just trying to feel out what you're digging into in terms of how this,
Just, I'm just trying to understand, you have, this is,
Okay.
you've got different entities,
Yeah.
and it's good to collaborate. The question is, how is it structured? Just such that, there's clarity in it and what precedent exists, that's all. No, I mean.
And it would also, for River Forest residents, they're getting access through the high school to these fields through OPRF, and this is what's being worked out in exchange for those fields, which are Oak Park residents.
Yeah.
So, but I think it does lead a little bit to a question we talked about earlier: is what's the time frame for this, and how will this work out in terms of the longevity of the
Duration.
duration?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
We have a current IGA between our groups and 2026. It's a 5 year, so 21, it was just renewing, it's through 26. Certainly, we would want to extend the duration of that, but we don't have that part of the IGA nailed out between Ken and I at this point.
Yeah, and again, I would say that it makes sense to have, again, Greg and I haven't spoken about it, so I guess my thought at the table is kind of like, what is D200 looking for in regards to what, are you looking at a 10-year, 20-year, or 25-year? What is the, again, because I know you want to have some level of comfort that it's not going to change tomorrow. But I also don't think that we want to commit people for 50 years from now. What's going to be happening?
We're looking for a long arrangement. A long arrangement for sure. And so.
Something to consider is the life of turf. So if we're investing in a turf for 8 to 10 years, generally, if this gets more use, it could be more in the age range, if we're mindful of use, it could be more in the 10. But I think that's something that we need to be mindful of on the cycle of rotation of turf replacement.
I appreciate that prompt because at the very least, what we'd like to look for is 2 cycles, right? 2 certain turf cycles with this. And so that takes us automatically to the 16 to 20 range. And I think a long-term arrangement is for the benefit of everybody. Yeah.
So one concern for us is that we budget for that turf for close to 10 years before we put it in. And so we would want to know how long in advance we need to start budgeting for that turf. And so how we make those things line up, because I completely understand you don't want to be paying for turf that you don't play on. But on the other hand, we don't want to be faced with you saying, oh, actually, we find another place for our track program. This is the last year, and we have to come up with $1 million because that's a lot of money. So I think that's the real conversation.
Yeah, and I think the initial MOU calls for, again, the scoreboards are a one-time installation. One of the things that we talked about was heating the dugouts, which is not currently there. and then the turf replacement. And again, to your point, we budget 8 to 12, right? Depending on, again, the care. I think my team does a pretty good job of maintaining it, as I'm sure yours does as well. The wearability of it is like we said, right now, you guys are, the primary users of the turf, but we go until 11 o'clock at night with other aspects. So again, just kind of parsing it out. I mean, I guess, are you thinking is it 16, 25? I mean, 30, I mean, again, I haven't talked about it, so I'm just trying to get a sense of what you're thinking.
I'll start at 50 and we'll negotiate.
So someone else can do it.
You've got square numbers, 16 and 25, so the next one would be, what, 36.
That's right.
I mean, I think there's also a way though that we can have built in there something to assure the park district that if we were to terminate early, there could be some sort of financial penalty potentially that would help offset any surprise. Yeah, I would say situation where like we pull out and all of a sudden like all fields or something. I don't think a lot of creative ways that we should do that though.
Yeah, and Sarah, I don't think anyone's looking for a penalty. I think we're just looking for
Transparency.
right, and so it's kind of like that you would say at least 3 years ahead of time, hey, we're gonna be pulling out. So that
Once you let us know that you never want to leave. So
it can happen. If they want you to leave.
how are you gonna get us out?
What I'm hearing is a kind of a longer exit, not 6 months before the end of the contract, but a couple of years before.
Yeah, because the park
To
district.
determine whether to extend or.
Yeah, because the reality is that our budget's a little smaller than yours, and so aside the monies that are necessary for us to be able to do the turf replacement, we would need a few years to build that.
Understood.
Well, I
Absolutely
I
understood.
think the other path is to set up, I mean, not to get the nitty gritty, but an escrow account, because what we do is every year we contribute certain funds. And if the high school is every year contributing a percentage that's based on that, then when the fund or when the disagreement was terminated, that would just shift over to the park district as a necessary part of the contribution of that work. So I think it could be set up so that it's budgeted yearly. And again, when it could be terminated a year before because you'd have 9/10 of the money saved away.
So it sounds like, so it sounds like, great, you and I'll work on some numbers and then we'll come back with part of the IGA is to have that.
Sounds good.
One other area I just want to comment back to is I know I'm going to speak a little bit to the park board, but I think I do so with some confidence that we would love to maintain grass fields throughout our facilities. I know I'm inclined to think that the high school would too, but the reality is that the usage of these fields is so intense because we are so landlocked that this transition from the grass field, as we've seen, to turf at very strategic locations is hugely beneficial. And I think, for instance, one of the early discussions about changing to turf at some of the diamond fields that we have, there's a lot of hesitance on the baseball, softball side about, oh, that's a big transition.
Right.
They are wholeheartedly behind it because of the lack of games that they play this year. So I just want to make it clear that we would all love to keep grass and the natural setting and all that kind of stuff. But this is really a huge win in terms of playing more often and maintaining good fields. And as we saw with the middle schools before those were turf, not just beating them up and making them almost unusable. So it's a very positive step. I know there'll be hesitance in the community, but I hope people can really look at that and think about it in a positive manner.
Is there some kind of offset? Like, I really appreciated that Sandy brought up the environmental aspect of it. So is there some type of offset that can be done or considered as we're moving through this process of development with the environmental agencies we have here in Oakville?
I think we talked with Gary Cunning, who's kind of a leader on the sustainability front, and I'm a practicing architect and done a lot of landscape planning, and we like to think of turf as being very natural, but it's pretty much as far from it as you can get when you look. Yes, it's probably better than turf, but the the, mowing it, maintaining it, pesticides, all of the things that go into it. Turf does have a negative side, just as, grass has a negative side. And turf has a negative side, some of the materials in it. But those are improving all the time. We've moved to Nike Grind, which has the very understood chemical makeup, so it doesn't have some of the risk that other people. So I'm not sure there's a one-to-one comparison environmentally, because both have positives, both have negatives. But getting kids out and playing more often and more regularly out from behind screens, whether it's, high school students or partners with younger kids, those are huge positives. So
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
not sure we
sure. I live right next to Julian. I feel it. Like, I get it. I'm thinking though on the overall project, right? Not just the turf aspect, but like you've already mentioned something with the lighting in it. I'm not sure about this heated dugout business, but I don't know if the necessity nor the cost of this type of thing. And so I would want to know, like, what does that look like environmentally? I mean, I would love if, as we're in this partnership, which is super, super fabulous, by the way, I'm loving it. I wish the community was here for this, because this seems like a thing that, they're always like, what are you doing? Well, look at, we're doing it. But anyway, I would love just if we could include that in some environmental aspect in this conversation, or have some oversight of Gary or whoever might be the people in the development of the whole project.
Yeah, and didn't Gary come and talk to you guys about it?
Yeah, actually, what you said, Chris, a moment ago is exactly what Gary shared with us at a sustainability meeting. We had her at that school, maybe in April, I think it was. He talked about the offsets and how it's not a one-to-one correlation. And there are negative, and there's a lot of information out there to look for the negative effects of maintaining lawns, period. Much less, we're talking about a high school field like this, to get ready for competition, not just on a residential area. So he did give us feedback on that, but I hear your question, Gina, and I appreciate the conversation here quite a bit about the need to focus on the environmental impact of all this. As we bring forward, the final details on what this project is, the costs, we can work with FGM, the architect who's kind of leading the conversations and the design, to see sort of, picture of what this looks like.
And one of the things I'd say, Gina, as well, is that there are recycled materials that can be part of that, right, from a standpoint. And again, I'm not sure what the grip is that's on the track itself, but I would think that there would be a substance that could be looked at. As we talked about, we used the Nike Grind. We've also talked about a cooling agent, because again, they do get warm, and how to do those cooling agents. So I think that there's some of that. One of the things I would just also ask you guys to think about is one of the things that we did with our community recreation center project is we actually looked at a minority and women-owned business component from a bidding perspective, from when you're talking about an overall equity aspect as well, looking at that as well.
Well, that's where I was going next.
I'm sorry.
I said, that's where I was going next.
You also can calculate your lights. Yeah, the energy efficient lights that you're gonna put in, you could do a pretty much like, this is how much power we've been using,
That's
this is,
very
so that is a huge impact. And then as you're, looking at your surrounding area, we've done a lot with bioswales. I don't know about the drainage for the neighborhood and stuff like that, but there are simple things you can do around the project to help make it more environmentally friendly overall.
And regarding that last point too, minority and women-owned, Ron Anderson is in the back. As soon as you said that, he gave me a thumbs up. So that is something that we focus on previously for our board policy. So
Something else that we could do a similar comparison of is what is the cost of seed and mowing and water and all the things that it takes to maintain a grass field, and compare that to what it takes, because the turf fields need maintenance too, but what it takes for the maintenance of the turf fields. And I think we would find that the turf fields generate a lot less environmental impact and pollution than the grass. And I was a huge fan of grass fields when we started all of this. But when you saw the mud fields that were adjacent to the junior highs and heard the folks in their PE department saying that, half the year they couldn't even play outside because it was.
That's our West.
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
And so to be able to to make those properly usable is just, I think is great. And if you drive by any of our fields, you see their community members using them all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
Pick up
And
games
I'm
and
not,
things
I'm
like
not
that.
anti-turf. I'm like, I just want the overall impact, right? So beyond just the turf, like all of what we're looking to do. I have one more question that's somewhat, maybe selfish. But the community does use that track quite a bit that is currently in our south field. And would that track then be available for community that's on the west field?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, just making sure. Similar hours, similar access? Or do we not know that yet?
We don't know that.
That was my follow-up question, because I wrote it down, that's so I would remember. When will we see scheduling? Like you talked a little bit about both, there's been some conversations about scheduling, so when might that be part of a conversation, or when
I
might we
mean-
see something else?
The scheduling, the exact scheduling, this team here, this team there, I don't know if that's something that, we would discuss necessarily at the board level, because that could shift from year to year based on how our teams work, and they'll figure out, we're doing that already right now.
Right,
It's not part of a change.
I mean, overall,
So,
like
but
impact, across bodies.
yes, we will have like the overall impact available when we nail down this IGA. There was one point I wanted, track availability. I think it's really important. This question came up on May 4th when we had our public conversation. It's come up with our community majors, talked with them on a few occasions. And I want to make sure I don't miss the opportunity to be very transparent about what we're talking about, because yes, there is a walking track over there. But what we're talking about in the back fields here is substantively different. It is a different track. When not used for our purposes, or even when we're maybe practicing and the outside lanes are available, yes, that's absolutely available for the public. We want to be very clear about that. But the Lake Street Field walking track is not functional for us, for our sports programs. This new track will be, and therefore it's going to be used differently as a result. So I want to be very upfront about that. This isn't a perfect one-to-one correlation, because the purpose of this track is to use it, right, for our students.
And I just put a
So-
plug in for the Community Recreation Center, which
We
we
have
have
a
an
track,
indoor
indoor
track.
track.
Pretty proud of my president.
On it.
So thanks for asking.
Thank you, yeah. And I think that's a good point, though, to make to the community. Like, I think people will want to understand what that difference is going to be with that track usage. It's widely used. At least that's my experience every time I drive by it.
So I would say that from the next step standpoint, the boards, I think, it sounds like Sarah's done some conversations, Jake has done some conversations. Sounds like those conversations with the village trustees need to continue. Greg and I will have conversations with Kevin in regards to trying to see when it can get on their agenda for review. And if we get the green light from that standpoint, he and I will finalize a draft of IGA to be brought to each of your respective committee of the whole meetings for discussion, and then hopefully presented for approval again sometime this summer,
You got
sooner
it.
versus later.
That's exactly right. As soon as we can. Which really for our board probably means we're talking about, maybe we can knock it off in July. There wouldn't be a committee meeting in July. There's just that one meeting. And for there, we'll do that. Otherwise, we'll be talking about it in August for our board.
Yeah, we don't have a committee of the whole meeting in August.
Okay.
And so, but again, if it's discussed, if we have something forward to discuss in July, it can still be approved in August.
Great. Any other?
Do we have a motion to adjourn,
So move. Second.
or the park district board meeting?
Eager.
Second.
Sandy, all in favor?
Should have been more clear.
Done.
200, we don't usually go this short, so we might want to stay. Do we have a motion? All in favor? Aye. All opposed?
You got your space already.
Thank you.
Yeah.